You and I have had some conversations about understanding your child and helping them play their own game. Can you share a little bit more about what does that actually mean? For me, I looked at it and said, this is about creating a greater sense of connection, enabling my children to grow up valuing and respecting who they are as individuals, and really enabling them to be set up for success so that they lead a healthy, successful life. I'm interested to hear your perspective on what that means and what are some key things that you think are important in terms of setting our kids up for success?
Yeah, I think it comes back to the allowing the children to be who they are, not who we expect them to be. And so really getting to know your kiddo. And that's why the work on the parent is so important, because you have to understand what's yours and what's theirs. Because there's so much projection that we can bring into any relationship, but particularly with our kiddos, because of this perspective that they are a reflection of us. And so depending on how attached you are to that concept or how oriented you are to that, that is like so much suffering a parent can cause themselves and their child because of their own whatever emotions haven't been worked out, or whatever their viewpoint is on that. So in playing your own game, like I think I have a really unique perspective in that, like I really have a hard time finding anything wrong with kids. I can find plenty wrong with adults. But for some reason, when a child is involved, like I can only see, even with the most challenging behaviors, how that is, if channeled and guided and contained in the right way, is an incredible strength. And so if we can orient to look at our children as everything's a strength, then it changes how you relate to them. And so one example with my kiddo was very difficult for me as a parent when he was, from birth to like 6, was fairly challenging, but I could see the ways in which I didn't want to like get rid of any of those behaviors or personality traits, because he's going to make a really strong leader one day. And as difficult as it was, and I used to yell, there were a lot of behaviors I needed to change. I'd really look at it as like, everything in parenting is a moment to moment experience, and to not get so attached to the guilt and shame that comes when you lash out at your kiddo, when particularly it's your own stress that has actually nothing to do with the child. So it's really getting to know your child's personality, to know, their likes and their dislikes, what's natural to them. An example I like to give about like, how do you know what kind of learner your child is? My middle kiddo was like 18 months old, I think at the time, almost 2. And we were coming out of a parking lot grocery store, and we have people here in the Seattle area. It's a magazine, like a newspaper, that it's called The Homeless something, but everybody that works there are homeless, and they create this newspaper and then they sell it for like $1. And so this gentleman was standing with his paper at the edge of the driveway of the parking lot, and was like, kind of holding it like this. And we got home. And as soon as we got home and he jumped out of the car, like not even 2 yet, he starts standing in our driveway doing the same thing, like the same movement. And it was for some reason in that moment, I was like, oh my gosh, this kid learns by acting out. So anytime they watch a movie from the time they were little, and I was kind of like reflecting like, oh yeah, he does this after a movie too, is he has to act out the scene. And so I know his learning style, he has to be able to have that ability to process by acting things out, right? So it's those kinds of things that you want to start looking for, and really realize that like children have some of you and your husband or your partner's characteristics, but they are not us. And so like really avoiding like, oh, that's your mini me, or things like that, or you're just like your dad, or you're just like your mom, or, those. Language plays a huge part in allowing kids to play their own game, is really watching the language that we use and trying not to box them into something. And even like, I hear parents so often like, oh, he's going to be, or she's going to be a doctor or something like that, is keep it more open of like, oh, you seem to have the characteristics that could make a good doctor as an option. And there are lots of options. Another one is that through my own journey, realized that my oldest was more introverted and shy, and introversion and shy are not mutually exclusive. Like they're different, but I was trying to make him an extrovert. And a lot of that had to do with my own, like the world is built for extroverts most of the time. And he was very quiet. And so part of it tapped into my insecurity of like, what's wrong with my child, or, why isn't he talking? And he was 6 when I realized. I had already seen the TED Talk and I read the book, Susan Cain, Quiet, but I went and saw her speak. And I was like, it was the most, all of a sudden, I just saw it for some reason. There was this clarity. I'm like, oh my gosh, Noah's an introvert. It changed the way I interacted with him because I understood what that meant in terms of like, he can't keep going like I do. And like, he needs time away. And so when they're younger, they'll throw a tantrum because they don't know how to communicate that. And so it wasn't often, but he would like slam a door after a birthday party when he got home, because there'd be like just a lot of emotion. And so I realized that like, so instead of getting mad, right, there's the one hand of like, they need to respect us. You can't slam doors. It's like, is he really slamming the door to make me mad? It's just his way of communicating that he needs something. So you just let that part go, and then you talk about it later, even if it might not even be necessary to talk about that.
I love those examples so much, because I think, to your point, every behavior is communicating something. But as parents, if we get caught up in our child's behavior is a direct reflection of us, this child is me, and we get caught up in not being able to separate and start to understand and be more inquisitive about our children and what they're experiencing, we miss a lot of things. And I think as someone who's done a lot of personal work, I really recognize now things in my childhood that created belief systems or patterns that created a lot of pain for me in my life. And they weren't intentional. I think they're very rarely intentional. And parents really have no idea. We are subconsciously repeating the patterns that we grew up with. And I love you even talking about your kids and starting to learn their own game. I have 3 kids. They're 3 very different children from one another. They are all 3 highly competitive, but other than that, they're very, very different. My oldest is very self-directed, very clear in general, like what his path in life is. At 7.5, he pulled me aside to ask me what was interest in a bank and what's the stock market. We talked for 90 minutes about this topic. I was like, oh, this kid, I never have to worry about him. He is very self-motivated. He learns. He's built multiple businesses. He understands and is able to see how people might react emotionally to things before they do. He's just a very thoughtful, very logical kid. And then I have my daughter who's very creative and very, very athletically driven. She needs to be in motion all of the time, more of a linear thinker. So for her, school is great and easy. And then I have my youngest who is very energetic, extremely emotional, mood swings left and right, has ADHD and some other things. And each one of those children has challenged me in new and different ways. But to your point, I think sometimes as parents, we are missing the very signs that tell us the things we need to look for. So like my youngest, I saw really early on that he was very, very smart, but he had circumstances that were either really great or really challenging. And I'll never forget, he was like 3.5 or 4. He was in preschool, and the preschool teacher pulled me aside and immediately started, I could tell, with like a compliment sandwich. I'm like, oh, this is not going to be good. Compliment sandwiches, right? Like I try to say something nice and then I say all the mean stuff. So I was like, oh, he's such a sweet kid, but ... And she told me, hey, I'm really worried that, first of all, she thought he was defiant because he made his ex look like a T. I'm like, that's actually developmentally accurate. So he's not being defiant. But 2, she was saying he's not learning his letters. And I really think that he's not going to be successful in kindergarten. I'm really worried he's going to be behind. And I think as a parent, right, our immediate reaction can be, oh my God, I'm a terrible parent. What's going to happen? My child's not going to be successful. And then we don't stop and actually get some more context. And in that moment, I was like, wait, this kid's really smart. This seems odd to me. So I started asking, well, how are you teaching the letters? What's happening? And bizarrely enough, I found out she was teaching the letters without the phonetic. I've never seen this. How do you teach A without giving the sound? And I was like, well, that's odd. And so what I did was just, you know what? I'm going to try something else. So when I was a little kid, my favorite show, we used to watch this in kindergarten, was The Letter People. and they're little puppets. There's like Mrs. A and Mr. M. And
I
they
don't
sing.
know that.
Yeah, they're awesome. And they sing and dance. So I thought, you know what? I'll see if he likes this. And within 2 weeks, he knew every single letter, and he knew what they call the squish sounds, like CH and all of those things, right? TH. And I ended up going back and telling the teacher, like, actually, no, he doesn't have any problem learning. He's already learned them all. But what was interesting in that process is it was the first sign that maybe he learned differently. Like, first really obvious sign, maybe he learned differently, because to your point, he learns by video. He is an extremely visual child. And because of the ADHD, he likes the motion. And you know, it's funny now, I've watched him through the years. He'll watch videos and draw pictures. He'll literally watch the video on, and then he will create the picture. And anytime he can watch videos, he learns very, very rapidly. And that is his most natural way of learning. And I think that as I've watched him go through, you know, some of his classes in elementary school, I began to see more of these signs of places where sometimes the emotional outburst or the reaction is his inability to process what he's experiencing and a lack of words about explaining what he's struggling with. And so I think that if there are parents that struggle with things like that, and they're seeing their children have outbursts and they don't know how to deal with it, I'm really excited for what we'll be able to do in this community and how we'll be able to give parents some more tools to understand, like, you can stop and clear your own windshield on your car so that you're not processing it about yourself, but you can become more inquisitive and more understanding about your children. It can help you build a stronger relationship. It can help you identify your child's strengths and natural ways of working, help be an advocate for them in school and in their relationships, help them feel secure about who they are as people and recognize and appreciate their value. And what amazing things that does when I think about the next generation, because if I had grown up appreciating some of the things that were really unique about or special about me, instead of thinking they were the things that I needed to hide or be like everybody else, it would have avoided a lot of pain and suffering. And I think most adults, well, my experience, especially in the work I do on a day-to-day basis, is most adults don't know who they are. Many adults don't think that they're really special or unique. They don't really understand how they work or fundamentally why they've been gifted the gifts they've been given. And so this idea about being able to see this in your children, reflect it back into them, and give them the skills and tools that so many of us have not had is super exciting to me.
I can't tell you how many parents, by the time their oldest is 3 or 4, that I have spoken to that have come through my preschool with a similar story that you shared that just absolutely breaks my heart when all the teacher can see is what's wrong. Because I mean, I said earlier about birth to 5 being like the largest like learning range, that there's thin slicing a moment in time that is like so developmentally wide. It's crazy. Like, you can't just say at 3 you're supposed to do this, or at any particular age. And the fact that traditional education doesn't have the orientation to educate educators around being able to see those things in children and how they learn is like beyond me, because that is the only way I can see kids. And I think part of it was like, you know, during my practicum as a parent, as a teacher, there's a lot going on in a classroom. And so you can't see everything. But as the practicum teacher, I was able to observe from a different lens. So I would see things that teachers wouldn't see. And when I had my own student teacher, I'm sure it was the same. But I would say something to the teacher, and it would range from behaviors to, like, I remember one kid kept blinking so much. And so I finally asked the teacher, like, she was in 2nd grade, but I was just, I noticed a lot of facial expressions and body language. And so I was just picking up on these little things, and he needed glasses, and like, his learning went through the roof after that. And she's like, thank you so much. I never would have seen that. And so just being able to see the unique gift that every child brings, even if it's a challenging behavior, is just a way to orient as a parent. Is like, I've had parents make a list, like, what are all the behaviors that are challenging? And then how is that a strength? Like, when you think of that person as an adult doing this thing, you know, what's the strength? Now, all strengths overused become challenges, right? Even as the adults, but it's just a reorientation, a perspective shift. Like, one of the favorite stories I have about just shifting perspective on your child is my daughter at around the age of 2, well, always is very creative. But at the time, to me, she was just a big old mess. Like, she couldn't. And part of it was attributing it to like, I had just started my business. She was the 3rd child, but like, she would drink smoothie with her hand. She would, like, you know, rub muffins and food on the table and all over. And as much as like my best efforts to like use utensils and all that kind of stuff, she just constantly had food all over her. And so two things I recognized is that she is super sensory oriented. She just loves texture and feeling things, but I'd still get frustrated. And Rusty, my husband, walked into the kitchen one day and I don't know if I was yelling at her or I was just upset. And he just looked at me and he goes, honey, she's an artist. And in that moment, like now I see her as an artist. Right? And it alleviated any like stress. I still get frustrated every once in a while, but it was information for me. Like she needs something sensory to do. So then I'll create the environment for her. Like, hey, you want to go in the tub or on the deck? And here's some coffee grounds. Here's some whipped cream. Here's, shaving cream, whatever. But the reorientation of like, she's not doing this to piss me off. I just started seeing her as incredibly creative. So one of the things I say to her often now is I would love to see the world through your eyes, because we don't see the world in the same way. And she sees things like her, and this has always been the case, her color is really intense when she was younger and coloring. She just has a really vibrant visual something or other. Like I really do wish I could see the world through her eyes, because I know it's so different from mine. And now she's the kiddo that like cares what food looks like way more than I do. And like she makes mac and cheese and toast and like puts breadcrumbs and makes it like, she gets mad at me if I don't like do the presentation properly on the plate. I'm like, this is the kid that was like smoothie and muffin all over her, food all over her face constantly. And so, the biggest thing I think are like snippets and moments in time. Like everything is some short phases, some longer phases, but just being present to who your kiddo is. And like you said, with like the windshield wiper, like getting clarity on like what's mine and what's theirs.